I call the honourable member for Barara.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I speak as a member who served with Malcolm Fraser in the other place and for some 10 years. I speak of him in the context of a parliament that can be at its best when we remember his service as we did Gough Whitlam's service. I think he would have been proud of us recently when we spoke as one on the issue of the death penalty. I served, obviously, at a time when the Parliament was at its most adversarial. I know something of the pain that so many suffered at that time. It was an extraordinarily difficult time. As we moved towards 1975, I had many friends on both sides of the Parliament. After 1975, it was difficult to say that we were friends. The events were extraordinarily challenging. I want to put one context, if I may, on it, because some of my friends often suggest that Malcolm did not do all that he could have with the mandate that he received in 1975 and 1977. It was important to understand the depth of feeling within the Australian community at that time. And I know, having spoken with Malcolm about those issues, that he was about reuniting Australia after a very difficult circumstance and was very conscious that to press on with many of the changes that we may have thought were necessary and of fundamental importance could have been extremely divisive for a nation that was already experiencing division. He was about healing. And I think for my friends who take a very critical view, it's important to understand just that. I can remember Malcolm Fraser as a campaigner for me. I was first elected in 1973. I must say I was never a very successful member in relation to leadership contests. I must say I told Tony Staley when he came round to talk to me about possible moves that I didn't support them. And when Billy Snedden rang me up later on, I had to tell him I wasn't going to vote for him, so I had both Malcolm and Billy convinced that I didn't vote for them. Just very interesting. My votes are never well understood. Can I just say a little about the big man? I remember in 1975 when he came around to my home in Oatlands, and he came with Tony Eggleton, a great man who is with us here today and whom I acknowledge. My daughter Kirsty, who is well known as having been a fearsome refugee advocate and in New South Wales also as the environmental defender, looked at Mr Fraser and she said, "Oh, Mr Fraser," she was 3, "you're a big man." And she looked at Tony and she said, "And you're a little man." I'm sorry, Tony. But it's a very interesting anecdote about a man who came and worked with me in my constituency and was extraordinarily well received, and that I do remember. But for me, my greatest pride was to be able to walk with a leader who appreciated something of the Australia that I think is of fundamental importance, not just to us, but to the world. Malcolm, in his comments, was very kind to mention my support for our cultural diversity. I have to say that cultural diversity is a strength, not a weakness. I think many fail to recognise that the fundamental problems that exist around the world often occur where people feel threatened. And one of the things you can say about Australia is that nobody can feel threatened in this society. With more than 6 million of our citizens overseas born, don't mean to correct you, Malcolm, but Israel and Luxembourg, I am told, have a larger proportion of their populations overseas born.
But you wanted to anyway.
And in Luxembourg, I think it's the tax arrangements. Very important to understand, not the United States, not Canada. And I say to people so frequently that we are an example to the rest of the world about how people can come together and live together harmoniously. But it doesn't happen. Non-discriminatory selection is important. But coupled with it is the support for the programs that were institutionalised under Malcolm Fraser's leadership. Mention has been made of our special broadcasting service. It started with radio before he was there, broadened to television, and what we know today was his government's pioneering work. When you look at the settlement programs, the language programs, the Galbally report, the way in which it was implemented, it has given us a society which is, I think, unique in the world, an example to all others. I walked the same path in relation to apartheid. Members know from time to time invitations are extended by those who seek support for their particular positions. The South African government was no different. I would never go to South Africa until those policies changed. And my first visit to South Africa was in 1994 when they had their first democratic elections, and I was able to participate as a Commonwealth monitor. He gave me pride in Australia for what we were able to do and achieve. If it were only for those matters, he would be worthy to be commended by us all for his achievement. But there was so much more. I think the only one that hasn't been mentioned today was to put in place Australia's first Freedom of Information Act in 1982. For my own part, I was pleased to work with him, but for my own part, the most difficult and telling experience in the Parliament for me was in 1988 when I crossed the floor on a race issue against my own party. I might say Malcolm was more supportive of me then when I had a different view than when I might have wanted to take a different view at other points in time. But one should not be surprised about that. He rang me and was very supportive at what was a difficult time. I don't mean to correct people in the debate today, but I want to put one other matter in context. He did start the building of this Parliament, but he was never an advocate for it. Doug Anthony and Malcolm Fraser came to us in a party room meeting in the old Parliament House and said, we've got a great plan for a new accommodation for members of Parliament. We're going to build 2 extra annexes, one on the bowling green for the House of Representatives, the other on the bowling green for the Senate. And I have to say, the party room rolled him. There were only 2 speakers, and he was suddenly convinced that rather than Menzies' legacy on the lake, he should build a new Parliament House on this site, for which the Prime Minister has given him credit. Can I just say that in the life of the life of Heather and myself, Tammy looms large. She was an extraordinarily First Lady for this nation. She made spouses feel particularly emboldened in supporting their partners in this place. She accompanied my wife Heather quite frequently around our electorate. She was a focal point for geniality and, I must say, a magnificent First Lady for Australia. Can I just say, for Phoebe and Mark and Angela and Hugh, you are right to be proud of your parents for the contribution they've made. You are right to be proud of your father, whom we lament has passed. We thank Malcolm for his service to this nation.